Every building you have ever paid to walk into has an off switch. You have watched that happen your whole life. The cinema you sat in on a wet Tuesday sold 40 tickets and nobody panicked. A dark screen costs almost nothing to keep dark. The stadium you drive past in February is a field with the floodlights switched off. The theme park you loved as a child closes for the winter, and the rides sit there rusting politely. The buffet you walked out of last month simply did not buy any food that morning. When nobody comes, the costs come down with them. That is the deal every venue on Earth signs on the day it opens. There is one building you have paid to enter that never got offered that deal. Right now, in a locked building in Atlanta with nobody inside it, more salt water than you have ever seen indoors is being pumped, chilled, filtered, and oxygenated at exactly the rate it ran on the busiest Saturday of the year. You are not there, and nobody else is either. It costs precisely what it cost on Saturday, and here is the part that should not work. Last year, that building took in $163 million, spent $119, and finished $44 million up. A building that can never be switched off turned a profit. So how? And yes, I know what you are thinking. The tickets are expensive, $70 a head, so of course they are making money. Hold that thought, because the ticket is quietly the least interesting number in that building. The word you actually need is forever. Hold on to it, because forever is why an aquarium behaves differently from every other attraction on this planet, and it explains both how these places got rich and why they are now dying. Quick thing before you go in, because I am genuinely curious. The last time you were in an aquarium, what did you actually stand in front of for the longest? And be honest with yourself here. Was it the sharks? Was it the jellyfish? Or was it that one enormous window where you stopped talking and just stared at nothing? Tell me in the comments, because I have a theory about which of those three the whole building is built around. You are going to see it in about 4 minutes. Right, the water, because that is what you are actually buying in there, not the animals. The water, an aquarium is, in plain engineering terms, a water treatment plant that has been persuaded to let the public walk through the middle of it. Georgia Aquarium reuses more than 99% of its water, which reads like an environmental boast and is quietly a confession. They cannot afford to do anything else. Filling that building once was a construction project in itself, and filling it twice would be a financial disaster. So the water never leaves, and it goes round and round and round through sand filters and protein skimmers and ozone contact chambers, and then back out through the glass at you, looking for all the world like the ocean. The animals swimming in it are, financially speaking, almost an afterthought. A clownfish costs a wholesaler a few dollars, while the pump keeping that clownfish alive costs more than the clownfish does every month forever. That is the whole business in one sentence, and it is a strange one. So let us put a size on the thing. There are 11 million gallons of water in that building, and 6.3 million of them sit in one single exhibit. That room is longer than a football pitch is wide and deeper than a house is tall. It holds more than half of everything in the building. The acrylic holding it back weighs about as much as 2 adult blue whales, and every living thing in there dies if the electricity stops for long enough. You have stood in front of that glass and thought you were looking at the ocean. You were looking into the working end of a water utility. The utility is the expensive part. Now walk in with me, because the route you take through this building is not an accident. Station 1 is the turnstile, and the first thing it does is quietly take a decision away from you. You pay $70, and you arrive in a slot that somebody else picked for you. There is no menu, no price per exhibit, and no cheaper ticket for you if you only want to see the penguins. You hand over one number that covers everything, and you hand it over before you have laid eyes on a single fish. The aquarium banks that entire transaction while you are still standing in the lobby, which means everything you do for the next 2 hours is, from their side of the glass, already settled. You cannot spend less by seeing less, and you cannot spend more by seeing more, because you have already paid the maximum. Station 2 is the glass, and this is the only part of the building you think you are paying for. It is also the part they most want you photographing. That is quietly why the biggest window sits in a room where you can stand still without blocking anybody, and why somebody put a bench in front of it for you. You will spend longer here than anywhere else inside. They know that. They built the room around the fact that you would stop talking. And while you are standing there, not talking, you are not in the shop, and you are not in the cafe, so eventually the building has to get you moving again with a corridor. Station 3 is the room you are never allowed into, and it is the actual business. Behind that glass, above it, underneath it, and threaded through every wall of the place, there is a plant. Ozone generators, oxygen concentrators, and chillers holding cold water species at temperatures the state of Georgia has never once experienced. Protein skimmers stripping fats and proteins and bacteria out of the water using nothing but columns of bubbles. None of it is on your tour, none of it is lit, and none of it can be paused for a quiet week in February. Technicians sit in there around the clock every day of the year because the entire volume of that building is filtered every hour, forever. The pumps are the asset and the fish are decorations sitting on top of the asset, and those pumps have not been switched off once since the day the doors opened. Not for a holiday, not for a quiet Tuesday, not for the 2 years when almost nobody came. Nobody publishes what that costs in a form you can quote, but it is the one invoice that arrives whether you turned up that morning or not. Station 4 is where the money is not, and that is the animals themselves. If you tried to buy the contents of a large public aquarium species by species, you would not spend anything close to what the building cost. A Florida breeder sells an angelfish to a wholesaler for 25 cents. It reaches you at $5 or more, and the person who bred it keeps about 5% of what you pay. Set the living inventory against what the building cost to put up and what it pays its staff every year, and it is a rounding error. Now, that is not quite the whole picture. According to the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, a kilogram of fish sold as food is worth about $9, and the same kilogram sold into the aquarium trade is worth around $749, 83 times more for the same creature, decided entirely by where it ends up. So the fish are not cheap in themselves, they are cheap next to the plumbing, and the plumbing is the only comparison that matters, which produces a genuinely strange result. The cheapest thing in an aquarium is the thing the aquarium is named after. Station 5 is the exit, and you are not permitted to leave through any other one. You finish the route feeling good about yourself, holding a phone full of photographs and mildly emotional about a sea otter, and the corridor quietly deposits you into a shop. That is not laziness in the floor plan. Industry research puts retail at somewhere around 1/10 of a facility's revenue, and food and drink lift what you spend by another quarter to 1/3. Those figures come from the attractions trade rather than from the aquariums, so hold them as a range. But the direction is not in dispute because you have never once left an aquarium through a door that did not have a plush shark standing next to it. Station 6 is the desk beside that door, and it is quietly the cleverest object in the building. Membership costs roughly what your single visit just cost, sometimes less. The pitch writes itself because come twice, and it has already paid for itself, and it works, since renewal rates in this sector run north of 70%. But look at what the aquarium just bought with that discount. It converted you from a person who comes once into a person who comes whenever it rains, who brings every visiting relative through the door, and who buys the coffee and the plush shark on the way out. It also converted you into a person who pays in January, when nobody visits and the pumps are still running. And then, sitting on that same desk, there is one more thing, a donation box, because this is not a company, it is a charity, which brings us to the accounts, and the accounts are where your nice day out turns into a machine. Georgia Aquarium's own annual report puts last year's revenue at $163 million against $119 million of expenses. And the gate, meaning every ticket and every timed slot and every $70 like yours, produced $111 million of that, which means roughly 1/3 of the money never came through the turnstile at all, and instead came from the shop, the food, the events, the memberships, the parking, and that donation box. Take the expenses off the revenue, and the building finished the year $44 million better off than it started. That is not a museum scraping by on goodwill. That is a machine with a moat, and the moat is simply that nobody else is going to raise the money to build a rival one down the road from it. And here is the part you did not pay for. You bought 2 hours. The pumps bought the other 22, and the day after that, and every day since the doors opened, and not one ticket was ever sold for any of it. You pay for a morning, and the building pays for a century. So that is the machine, and it works. Quietly, unglamorously, on plush sharks and January memberships, it works. Then explain the National Aquarium in Baltimore, which spent more last year than it took in. Or explain Merlin Entertainments, which runs more than 40 aquariums around the world and hired Rothschild in February to find somebody willing to take them off its hands. Because the machine is standing on 3 props, and all 3 of them are quietly being pulled out at the same time. Prop 1 is the dead man's check. Georgia Aquarium does not exist because a business plan worked. It exists because Bernie Marcus, who co-founded Home Depot, wrote a check for $250 million. Coca-Cola donated the land it stands on, and so the building opened its doors owing absolutely nobody anything. No mortgage, no debt service. On day 1, the single most expensive line on a normal balance sheet was simply not on the page. Monterey Bay is the same story with a different surname on it. David Packard put up $55 million to build the place, and he attached one condition that tells you he understood exactly what he was funding. It had to be economically self-sustaining after opening. He was not worried about whether they could build it. He was worried about the forever part. Almost every aquarium you can name that looks comfortable today was born debt-free because somebody very rich wanted it to exist. That is not a business model, that is an inheritance. And nobody is writing that check now. Prop 2 is the halo, and this one is genuinely uncomfortable because these are registered nonprofits, tax-exempt. That status is what makes the donation box on your way out legal, what makes the corporate sponsorship deductible, and what allows a building charging $70 a head to describe a large part of its income as support rather than as sales. Georgia Aquarium's own published FAQ states that $1 of every ticket sold supports ocean conservation and research. $1 out of $69.99. I am not going to pretend that dollar is fake, because it is not, and the research it pays for is genuinely real. But look at the arithmetic across the whole sector, because in 2018, accredited zoos and aquariums across America spent $4.9 billion on operations and construction, and in 2019, that same accredited community spent $5.2 million on big cat field conservation, 0.1%. Those particular figures come from Born Free USA, which campaigns against captivity, so weigh them accordingly. And then there is the pay, and it is a bleak one. The president of the Aquarium of the Pacific was paid $461,000 in the most recent filing, and Julie Packard, running Monterey Bay, took $399. Meanwhile, the national average for an aquarist sits at around $15 an hour, and that is the person who feeds the animals, scrubs the acrylic, dives the exhibits, and keeps 100,000 living things breathing. Prop 3 is the supply, and it is going first. Around 99% of marine aquarium fish are still taken from the wild rather than bred in captivity, and historically something close to 70% of them were stunned with cyanide first. Tariffs landed on Indonesian and Fijian coral last year, and the reef is getting more expensive, more regulated, and more embarrassing to be seen buying from. Meanwhile, the pumps still need something in them worth looking at. So here is what an aquarium actually is. A water utility with a turnstile attached, selling you 2 hours of access to a filtration plant, with the fish as the interface. Its costs are fixed, enormous and permanent, while its revenue is seasonal, weather-dependent, and completely optional for every single person it has ever served, including you. The only reason that equation closes at all is that somebody extremely rich paid for the building before you were born, the government quietly waived the tax on what happens inside it, and the shop by the exit shifts enough plush sharks to help cover the electricity. It is genuinely one of the most impressive machines in the attractions industry, and it is genuinely one of the most fragile. And the reason those are not two separate facts is that the thing which makes it unkillable, that nobody can casually build a rival one next door, is the exact same thing that leaves it balanced on a knife's edge the moment the money, or the reef, or the dead man's check quietly runs out. You cannot mothball an aquarium because there is no Dark Tuesday and no winter closure. There is only forever, and forever has an electricity bill. Right now, in that building, with nobody in it, the water is still going round. You never bought a ticket to see the ocean, whatever the sign above the door said. You bought 2 hours inside a pump room that had been running since long before you booked, and $1 of your 70 reached the ocean. If you want another business that looks like one thing and is quietly something else entirely, I made a whole video on how dollar stores actually make their money, and the answer has almost nothing to do with the price on the shelf, and it is on screen now. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there are a lot of them, and most of them are hiding in plain sight. Thanks for watching.